My name is Jennifer Frazier and I am a gardener in Colorado, and I'm here today to teach you about winter sowing native plants. I inherited a large backyard garden when I moved into my house 7 years ago, and I wanted annual flowers, but I didn't want to spend $300 a year on plants that were just going to die. So I discovered this technique called winter sowing, in which I could sow my seeds outdoors in inexpensive, recycled, and sometimes new containers for very little money. This past year, I discovered that we have a real need to grow more native plants, and it occurred to me that winter sowing is perfect for propagating native plants. So I've started growing native plants in my winter sow bags, and I'm here today to show you how to do it too. My friend here, Andrea, is going to help us.
Great to see you
Good
again.
to see you.
Hi gang, I'm Andrea Montoya.
And what questions do you have for me today?
Well, I'm really interested in this whole sort of making your own little greenhouse at home. So I guess the first thing I want to start off with is I'm interested in talking about natives.
Yes.
I know they're really important in the pollinator habitat that we have in our area. Let's talk about it a little bit.
Okay, so why natives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I had my garden, I saw lots of bees, and I thought, well, you know, non-native flowers are just as good as native flowers, so why do I need to bother growing natives? But then I discovered this year that there are a lot of insects that really can only survive on native plants. They can only eat a very few species of native plants, or they need the pollen from a very few species of native flowers.
And probably the habitat too.
Yes, yes. And so if we don't grow those plants in our gardens and in our habitats, then these insects don't have food.
So are they native insects, right?
They're native insects.
Mm-hmm.
The two biggest groups are caterpillars, and what's great about caterpillars is they are baby food for native birds.
True.
Yes, and a lot of other animals eat caterpillars, and so they're sort of the base of the food web, but they need these native plants in order to live.
Yeah, they put their larvae on them, right?
Yes, yes, and those larvae you'll notice a little bit of leaf damage if you're lucky enough to get some of these caterpillars on your plant, but that's a sign of success. That means that you are helping support your wildlife in your neighborhood.
I have noticed that in my own native plant garden, that there will be some little nibbling away at the leaves, and I used to think that was a bad sign, but the plant flourishes anyway, and then I have a lot of butterflies.
Yeah, if these caterpillars make it, which hopefully a few of them will, they turn into butterflies and moths, and they make your garden beautiful that way too.
Is there a difference between a honeybee and a native bee?
Yes, honeybees are introduced from Europe, and they make honey, which is wonderful, but our native bees live in the ground, usually sometimes in wood, and they tend to be smaller, but often quite beautiful, iridescent or striking in some way.
And the bumblebees are adorable.
Oh, they are. They definitely are.
They live alone, and they don't grow up in great big colonies. Like one honeybee hive I learned can have up to almost 1 million bees if it's a big hive.
Yeah.
That's a lot of competition for our native bees.
Yeah.
So I love that you're growing native flowers. Let's jump in. Tell us what you have learned to do and how it's worked for you.
Okay, great. So winter sowing uses cheap containers. I have settled on 1 gallon plastic bags. You can also use milk jugs, yogurt containers. I've tried that out west, and I think these are superior for a variety of reasons. One is that they retain moisture better. Another is that they're very easy to set up very quickly. And the last is that they're easy to clean and they press flat for storage.
So you can use them over?
Over and over again.
Great.
I usually get several years out of mine. The first thing that you want to do when you're making your winter sow bag is label it. Because if you wait and you try to label it after it's wet, you will find that the tape won't stick or the marker won't write. So I have found that I like to use masking tape or painter's tape. You just tear a piece off, stick it on the very bottom of your bag because that will keep it out of the sun. The sun has a tendency to bleach out whatever label you're using. If you write on this, it'll bleach out like you see on this old writing here. So I put mine on the bottom. Today I'm going to winter sow black-eyed Susan, which is a wonderful native plant. I'm going to write the Latin name here, which is Rudbeckia hirta. One of the things that makes this plant great, it tolerates dryness, it tolerates shade. So a lot of people have trees in their backyard and they want to know what flowers they can grow in shady conditions. The black-eyed Susan is an excellent native plant for that. I got my label on. The next thing I want to do is cut some holes in the bag. I like to cut the corners off like that. And then I like to make a V-shaped notch right in the middle of the bottom. Don't worry if you cut through your tape, that's not a big deal. That tape will be taken off next year anyway when you use the bag again. So you can see here the notches so that this bag will drain and it doesn't turn into a swamp. I like to do my winter sowing in the kitchen sink. That's the perfect place because the sprayer on your sink is great for wetting the potting mix, and any mess just washes right down the drain. You can do this anytime between the winter solstice and the spring equinox is generally considered to be the winter sow season.
I think one tiny aside would be maybe to have a tray under that dirt if you don't have a garbage disposal.
Yes,
that clay
yeah. So
will get stuck in
You don't want to have to call the plumber as a result of your winter sowing.
I'd like to make a quick mention while you're filling this bag up with soil. I really loved that you did go ahead and use the Latin name. They can be hard to learn, but if you go to the nursery and say, I want a sunflower that's orange in the middle, or you go to the seed store and you say, I just want to get some native seeds that look like a yellow flower, you could come home with anything.
Yes.
It's much better to know the Latin name.
Yeah, the advantage of the Latin names is there's no confusion. You'll know exactly what you're getting if you use Latin names.
Yeah, it sounds a little stuffy, but it's the way to go.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing is that we feel like it's super important and it's absolutely necessary to buy untreated seeds, seeds that are non-GMO. They haven't been treated with any neonics, and they haven't been treated with any fungicides. They're just native seeds.
And you can collect them from your neighborhood if you know you have native plants, and they are, in a place that's like community property, not an open space, because that's not legal there. But like, if your neighbors have native plants, you can just go ask permission, say, can I take some seeds off your plant? Yes. Grab those seeds right off the plant, sow them in your bags. That's totally fine too.
Perfect.
Yeah. So you're looking to fill this bag about halfway filled with potting mix. You want to use potting mix as opposed to seed starting mix because seed starting mix is expensive and unnecessary. That stuff is sterilized for indoor seed growing, and you don't need that outside. The cold temperatures will provide enough protection from fungi for your seedlings.
Good to know.
Yeah, and you don't want to use garden soil either because it can be dense. And for the purpose of winter sowing, we want something light and fluffy that will really hold on to moisture well to keep our seedlings wet during that critical germination period.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Yeah.
So what is the time frame for this? Do we have to do it in December? Because here we are in March, kind of in the middle of March, and we're doing it now.
Yeah, so you have a long time to do your winter sowing. You have all winter. You don't have to rush. You can do a few bags at a time as you have time on your schedule. And you could even do it starting in the fall, really, because these natives, they evolved to expect winter, and that's not a problem for them. You can wait as long as the weather is cold enough that you feel like you have to wear a sweater at night is probably fine. Even for natives, I've had luck with prairie coneflower, started in April.
Wow.
From seed. So, I mean, you just never know. If it's towards the end of the season and you're not sure, just try it, If they don't sprout this year, you can always save the bag for next year and try again, or just tip the contents into a compost bin and try again with a new bag next year.
It feels so much more comfortable to think about losing some seeds, even though we don't want to, than losing plants that we've spent a couple $100s on.
Yes, that is a huge advantage of winter sowing from seed because, you can experiment with seeds. You can try new things, put them in your garden, see if they like your particular conditions. If they don't make it, it was a few cents worth of seeds, no big deal.
Exactly, there you go.
You don't feel like you flushed that $100 down the drain.
Exactly. So now we've gotten your bag. You've labeled it.
I labeled it.
You've cut out these wonderful vents on the
cut
bottom
the holes.
for drainage.
The next step is you want to soak this potting mix and get it dripping wet so that you can see water dripping out the bottom.
How much potting soil did you put in? A couple of cups or what?
I like to fill it so it's about half full before I add the water. The goal is to get it to be 1/3 soil and 2/3 air.
Okay.
That's your target.
Great.
But when you add the water, it's going to cause it to compact down a little bit, just because that's what happens when you add water to potting mix. So I'm going to add that in there, work it in with your hands. It's kind of nice in the middle of January when you're missing the flowers. You can at least feel you're doing gardening in your kitchen. Okay, I think, yes, it's starting to drip. That means you've added enough water.
Perfect.
It should feel heavy. The soil should feel wet, but not like swampy. If there's water, if you can see there's like a lake in there, make your holes a little bigger so it drains faster. Now that we've got our soil prepared, the next step is to dry our hands off. Because if you have wet hands when you try to put the seeds in, they'll stick to your fingers and make you crazy. I have the seed packet here. I like to use these little dishes from my kitchen for putting the seeds in so I can see what I've got. And I'm just going to pour these seeds out.
And I suppose any little lid or anything
Yeah,
would work for the seeds,
any
right?
little lid, dish. You just want to be able to see them. It's kind of hard to pick them up out of the packets sometimes. Wow, that's a lot of seed. Now, believe it or not, that's probably 50 seeds right there, because those seeds are really, really small. And you can put as many or as few as you want in the bag. That's totally up to you. The nice thing about natives is they're kind of used to being crowded when they germinate, because that's the conditions that they have in the wild. So I'm just going to take these seeds and sprinkle them in the bag. I try to sprinkle them out evenly. If you're in doubt as to how deep the seeds need to be, leave them on the surface, because that's where they fall in nature. If you have a seed pack that says how deep to sow them, then you can either push little indentations into the soil with your finger, or after you're done sowing the seed, you can sprinkle potting mix on top to the appropriate depth.
Do you ever poke a hole, poke an indentation in the ground and put the seed in, or is that too deep?
I wouldn't poke I wouldn't stick my finger in like an inch deep and put the seeds down there. If you put them too deep, they'll rot.
Oh.
And you want them to stay pretty near the surface.
Good
a
to
lot
know.
of them need light in order to germinate.
Oh, that's a good point.
These seeds are pretty dust-like, so I'm not even going to bother to cover them, or you could just like gently work them in a little bit. That's fine. If you have some seed from your neighbor like this, you can just crush it into your container. Those seeds are in there. You can see they're those little straight things, and then you can just you don't have to clean it. You can just take this whole thing, sprinkle it right in the bag.
That's good to know. Cleaning out seed from the stem is really challenging.
It is. It can be time consuming. Okay, we've got our seed in our soil in our bag. The last step is to prepare the stake and the clothespin. The reason that you need these is to make sure that your seedlings don't suffocate if the bag does this. We have really high winds out west, really hot, sunny, dry conditions. Mm-hmm. If the bag does this and you're not watching, because you're going to be ignoring this most of the time,
Sure.
you could suffocate your seeds. I mean, this is a way that people often kill weeds, is they put plastic down on them. So I use a clothespin to prop this open. You can even just like fold it if it's one of the sliders, or if it's not one of the sliders, you want to get it like nice and flat so that it holds open like that.
I'm just going to show that to the audience, how you've made that nice and flat on there.
You can see on this one too. This is one of the slider ones. How
Excellent.
That's propping that open. Then the purpose of the stake is so that when the wind blows, because it will, and when the 10 inches of snow falls, which it also will, the bag will collapse a little, but it won't collapse all the way. There will still be this chimney of air that allows for some gas exchange and for some heat to get out. When the wind stops blowing, when the snow melts, just go out and straighten your bags back up again.
There you go.
I like to close it down to about there when it's the middle of winter. But as winter goes on and spring comes, the temperatures are going to warm up. And your job, as that happens, is to gradually open this bag so you don't cook your seedlings. You do not want boiling bag plants. And it will get hot in there. It's like a hot car. It will get surprisingly hot. So you want to open this up to allow for ventilation and also for rain and snow to get in. Did you have any more questions about this?
I do have a question.
Yes.
So these seeds are going to sprout. They're going to germinate. Then what do we do?
Oh, right. Okay, so you're gradually opening this up. You're also going to want to make sure that this stays wet. There's 4 choices for making sure that the bag stays wet before the seeds have germinated. One is to just dump snow in there. If you have a snowbank, you can go get the snow and then dump it in. That's what would happen in nature, so that's the easiest and best way. Choice number 2, get a plastic container or some sort of box, fill it with 1 inch to ½ inch of water, stick your bags in there and let them soak it up.
So like a plastic container?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Choice number 3, you can use your watering can to gently run some water down the inside of the bag so that you don't disturb that layer of seeds. And choice number 4 is to use a sprayer or a mister attachment on a hose to mist the top. That takes the longest, so that's my least preferred method. So, the way that you can tell if it has enough water, it should show condensation on the inside of the bag. See how this bag has liquid condensation? There's little droplets. That And the fact that the bag is heavy means that you have enough water in that bag. If you do not see the condensation and it feels light, that's the sign you need to add water.
This is a bag that Jennifer and I did about a week ago. You
Yeah.
can see there's lots of condensation.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And it's heavy.
And it's heavy. So no intervention needed. So you're opening this up, you're making sure it's staying wet. Your plants germinate. They start growing up the side of the bag. When it starts to get warm and this bag is open, you can remove the clothespin. You can take out the stake. You can even start to cuff the bag. The reason that you want to gradually open this up and start to fold it down is you want those seedlings to get gradually accustomed to wind.
Oh.
Because they've been protected from wind in this bag, and if you just suddenly took them out of the bag, they would have shock and they might die. You need to gradually adjust them to the fact that we have, hurricane force winds.
And that wind will also help to strengthen their stem so the stem gets thicker.
Yes, yeah. When the seedlings have got to be a few inches high, and any time after that, you can transplant these into your garden.
But let me clarify first. These are going to be growing outside all the time?
Yes.
They're never going to be on my kitchen table?
No.
Oh,
Always,
nice.
always outside. You need the sun to power this whole system.
Nice.
And you need the snow and the rain to add moisture. And
Great.
you need the cold to help those seedlings know winter happened. It's time to germinate.
Great. Great.
So once they've germinated and you are ready to transplant them in your garden, uncuff the bag because that makes it kind of hard to get them out. You don't have to cut them out of the bag. They you can take this chunk of soil and kind of ease it out sideways. You can ease it up from one end and then pull it out. I kind of turn the bag. And if you break a few of the stems doing that, don't worry about it. Plants are used to getting chomped on by herbivores and they will grow more leaves. You have this giant chunk of soil. Imagine that it's like a tray of brownies and you're going to be breaking off brownie-sized pieces to plant in your garden. You dig a hole, you put them in. You don't need compost, you don't need fertilizer, you don't need any amendments. These are native plants. They are used to living in our native soils. But you will need to give them extra water for at least the first few weeks, and probably you should keep an eye on them for the first year and watch out for wilting because they didn't get started in the ground and their roots take time to kind of graft themselves into your soil.
My experience with seedlings is that, even with the native seedlings, is that they like to be kind of planted maybe amongst some other little taller plants so that even though they will eventually be a full sun plant, the seedlings just can't get that cooked. In nature that would happen, right? The seeds would fall amongst other stalks and plants that were in place and eventually the plant will grow up to get the full sun that it may need.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true with this method of planting?
I think it's kind of depends on your property. If you have that kind of environment, that's great. You can put them in among your plants, but maybe you're starting from gravel and grass, in which case, don't let that stop you. It's still worth trying to put that plant in the ground and see if it'll grow.
Love it.
Yeah. So, I think that's about it. Oh, you will probably notice that about 10 to 20% of your bags will not germinate, but don't be offended and don't take it personally. The conditions that we had weather-wise this year just weren't favorable for those seeds to go this year. You can either hold on to that bag for a whole other year and try again next spring, and people have found that sometimes they go that way, or you can just tip the contents into your compost bin and try again next year.
I guess I would just add that you can be sure that this plant, even though eventually will be native, that won't need very much watering or care. In that first year or two, it's going to need a little
bit of babying.
It's going to need some caretaking.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, this has just been wonderful. It's exciting. What a wonderful way to get native plants into the ground for our native pollinators.
Yes.
And to do it on a shoestring budget, which is my favorite way to garden. Thanks a million.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.